Ladies and gentlemen, this is John Records Landecker.
John Records Landecker.
John Records Landecker.
John Landecker's shows have always been the smartest, most creative, high-energy performances on the radio. He's constantly challenging the listener to keep up, which is why everyone kept coming back for more. And guess what? He's just as entertaining and interesting off the air as he is on the air. That's the blurb that I wrote for John and Rick Kempfert that they graciously included on the back cover of their book, the New York Times bestseller, Records Truly Is My Middle Name. That's a lie about it being a New York Times bestseller, but everything else I said is absolutely true. For the better part of the decade of the 70s, every weekday at about 5:55 p.m., on the Big 89, the Rock of Chicago, Music Radio WLS, I had the good fortune to say, John Records Landecker is next. But most afternoons, by the time my show started at 2 in the afternoon, I'd see John coming into the station already. If James Brown was the hardest working man in show business, John was the hardest working man in radio. He'd get busy early in the day, writing that evening's always clever opening comments, delivered very quickly, almost unintelligible unless you were really paying attention. John always liked to run the music hot. He'd be in early preparing features like Americana Panorama, a clever play on words using a hit song title. Maybe he'd be producing a comic radio version of a movie like Star Wars, which he did with our great production engineer, Allie Rosen. Or one of his clever parody songs like Make a Date with the Watergate, featuring John as President Richard Nixon, and practically everyone else at the station reading the parts John wrote in his hilarious and biting commentary on the news of the day. You know, I was thinking about how now we turn to the late night TV hosts for their witty take on what's going on in the world, and it dawned on me that John was doing his own version of The Daily Show between hit songs before any of those guys came along. And of course, nighttime across Chicago, across Middle America and beyond that, meant you could hear or try to participate, if you dared, in what I guess was the original form of random social media posts and tweets, only it was heard and not seen, the world-famous boogie check. John and I both shared great love and respect for a WCFL jock who I grew up with and who predated John on Chicago radio at night. His name was Ron Britton. Ron's show was a constant wall of sounds that he'd react to, and it was a nonstop theater of the mind performance. Well, John's 6 to 10 show had that element and more. He definitely made you think. You had to work a little to keep up with the program. John was sort of the thinking man's Ron Britton. And also very important to John was the playlist. FM was starting to come into its own back then, and John knew to compete and maintain his #1 ratings, he needed the right mix of mayhem and music. So let me tell you about the WLS jock meetings. The highlight would usually be, first you'd have Lou Jack staring up at the ceiling with a rolled up newspaper like that during the entire meeting. And then Landecker would be complaining about the bubblegum music he had to play at night and the album cuts that he couldn't play. And that would usually be followed by Fred Winston, who would stand up, turn to program director John Guerin and say, "I think everyone should be fired, John. This would be a good time to just clean house and start fresh." And poor John Guerin tried to control that group. Before you watch the video and see the fastest mind in radio at work, I just wanted to say that I'm very happy I was asked to be here tonight. This guy has always been a Hall of Famer. Take a look.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a boogie check.
My boogie shoe.
This is John Records Landecker.
John Records Landecker.
You will never be a greatest jockey. You have lousy voice, lousy personality, and this will not change. Okay? So on the air is not for you. But you come on time, and you're a good worker. How about I make you program director?
The true oldies channel.
John Landecker, your reporter. And this on the WLS Music Radio Rewind is Can I I Get a Witness News? Now, the reason we call it Can I Get a Witness News is because, quite frankly, we cannot get a witness to prove that these stories is true. Page one. Good evening, Boogie Check.
Good evening, John Records Landecker.
I
am talking to you.
You are.
And the topic is you, your name.
Ma, wonderful topic.
So did Mom or Dad name you Records, and why did they name you Records?
You know, somebody mentioned this earlier today that people still didn't believe it. Here's the deal, and this probably won't be for the last time. It was my mother's maiden name. Her name is Marjorie Victoria Records. And when I was born, that was put on my birth certificate as my middle name. And that's the story, and I'm sticking to it.
Here at the old WLS radio station, which I am leaving after 9.5 beautiful years. Well, it just seemed like it was time to make an exit. So I've made arrangements to go to Toronto. I'm going to be living with Margaret Trudeau. And the Stones are coming over consistently, and we're going to be mounting a few Canadians. They may not be police, but they will be so close to me that I probably won't care, you know?
The boys be back in town again. That, of course, Thin Lizzy, I am John Landecker, 7 minutes after 9. This is WLS Music Radio and the big 89 Rewind.
John Records Landecker and Bob Surratt. And Saturday afternoon from the Windy City. Hey, how are you? Nice to have you aboard here as we celebrate 25 years.
Some people want to be lawyers, some want to be accountants. I decided I wanted to be on the radio. What do? You walk into a radio station, you say, hi, I'd like to be on the radio. Isn't that incredible?
WLS Music Radio, the big 89 Rewind on WLS, and I am John Records Landecker. And now, something special for this year's big 89 Rewind. Ladies and gentlemen, it sucked then, and it sucks now.
Time has come to make a choice.
Please welcome to the National Radio Hall of Fame, class of 2017.
Siri, what's the name of the next inductee?
John Records Landecker.
You sure you got that last part right?
I have no idea.
I guess we'll find out now.
John Records Landecker.
Yeah, it's actually pretty close.
Either way, he is in the Radio Hall of Fame now.
That's true.
Congratulations, John.
Ladies and gentlemen, John Records Landecker is next. There he is.
I didn't know you got something. I should have started at the beginning of that video so I could have gotten up here in time. They said that one of my strong points was my spontaneity, and I've had weeks to think about this. So strap yourself in. Good evening, my fellow broadcasters and radio geeks. Look, show prep. Thank you, Bob. Bob Surratt and I have been friends and co-workers since the early 1970s, but actually it's way more than that. Bob has never failed to call on me if he thinks there's a position that I can fill, from being a movie critic with him on Channel 11, Chicago Tonight, to being a fill-in co-host on WLS Radio. I'm going to do the thank yous. You only get one shot at this, and I'm going to take all the time I need. Thank yous to my family, my parents Marjorie and Werner, my brother Tom, who flew in from Washington State, my sister-in-law Sharon, my nephew Will, his wife Caitlin, and their unborn child, who still has about a month left in Caitlin's womb. My daughters, Tracy and Amy. Amy flew in from Los Angeles along with Bradley Whitford. Also Bradley's daughter Frances, who allowed her father to drag her here tonight. Who is this guy, Dad? Was he on Spotify? I think we should consult tonight's program. Neely White, Amy's a longtime friend who I've known almost as long as I've known Amy. My wife, Nika. My stepson, David Garrity, who's here with his wife, Sarah, and her mother, Paulette Zelinsky. My other stepkids, Siobhan and Max Garrity. Siobhan and her fiance, Nick Ginther, are not here tonight because they left for Florida a couple of days ago. And who can blame them? My granddaughters, Iris Lynch and Gatsby Garrity, and you know, while I'm at it, I'd like to thank my dogs. Zeke, Stella, Emma, Zubadash Duba, Gypsy, Gus, Colt, and my stepdog Quincy. In the radio timeline, Lucy Dobson, Ted Heisel, Tom O'Brien, and Art Volo. I have known Art since high school. And I had a whole thing ready to do about Art until Art, as Art only does, came up to me when I was sitting at the table, told me a couple of things, and I think they're indicative of so much about who he is and how he is radio's best friend. This address is 360 North State. WLS Radio was 360 North Michigan. The last three numbers of my zip code are 360. Now, who puts that kind of stuff together? Also, and this is, I think, even more important, November 2nd is the anniversary of radio. Today, 1920, radio went on the air for the first time. So today, radio is 97 years old. And who else would know that but Art? Also, Jim Donahue, Dave Albury, Mike Rivers, Paul Drew, Mike McCormick, John Guerin, Marty Greenberg, Saul Foose, Bill Gable, Jan Jeffries, Kevin Robinson, Rick Kempfer and his wife Bridget, Dave Stern, Vince Argento, Elliot Ephraim, Kipper McGee, Mary June Rose, Brant and Lissa Miller, John Quick, plus Mike Dempsey and Ralph Fine, who made the journey all the way from Michigan City, Indiana, to be here tonight. Of course, I'd like to say thank you to the National Radio Hall of Fame, who have reignited my inner radio geek. By the way, if you are sitting next to someone who knows me, stand by for a massive eye roll. My grandfather, William J. Records, introduced me to the Lone Ranger on television in the mid-50s. When I later discovered that the Lone Ranger originated as a radio program in 1933, I began a decades-long fascination that continues to this day. I came to the conclusion that one of the program's main creators has been dumped to the wayside while others continue to profit from his creation. When I found out I was going to go into the National Radio Hall of Fame, I thought I'd check out who else is in here. My jaw dropped when I saw the name Franz Stryker, who in my opinion created the Lone Ranger, the Silver Bullets, the Mask, Butch Cavendish, all of it from the mind and the values of Franz Stryker. Never before in the pages of history can one find a greater champion of justice. Well, I have been through the pages of history, and if anybody deserves a champion of justice, it's Franz Stryker. In a move motivated entirely by power and greed, George W. Trendle, the station owner, bullied Stryker into signing a contract that said everything and anything Stryker ever created from that time till the end of time belonged to Trendle. Stryker didn't have an agent. He didn't have leverage. It was a depression, and it was a job. Now, I doubt if any of them had any idea of the influence and longevity the Lone Ranger would have, influence in the sense that it allowed the United States, especially the youth of this country, to regain something that had been crushed by the Depression: hope. Here was a champion of justice. Here was someone who had your back. Here was something you could believe in again. Recently, 60 Minutes did a piece on Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who were convicted of spying on the United States in what was termed the crime of the century. The Rosenbergs had two sons, Robert and Michael. In the 60-minute piece, Michael was asked what it was like when the authorities came to take his parents away. Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but it was something like, I heard a knock on the door, I was listening to the Lone Ranger. So without saying so, Michael revealed that the lessons of American democracy via the Lone Ranger and Franz Stryker were broadcast into the home of Russian spies behind their back. The Ranger was a money machine for Trendle. Comic books, novels, movie serials, and the TV series with Clayton Moore and Jay Silverheels. If you look at the early episodes of that TV show, the credits say it's a play written by based on a play written by Franz Stryker. Oh, that's so nice. Trendle sold the TV rights to the Lone Ranger for millions of dollars. In fact, at the time, it was the most money ever paid for television rights. He gave Stryker a bonus, $4,000. In the 2013 Lone Ranger movie with Arnie Hammer and Johnny Depp, there is no mention of Franz Stryker in the credits, yet they used his entire story. I did a Lone Ranger search on Dish Network. I told you I'm a radio geek, right? In the week of October 7th to the 14th, 2017, 137 episodes of The Lone Ranger would play on 4 different networks. 1933 to 2017, I believe that is 84 years. We should all live so long. When it comes to awards, you know, how many times have you heard the expression, it's an honor just to be nominated? It's cliche, right? Well, not really. I found out I was going to be nominated when I read an email while I was on an elliptical machine at Planet Fitness. My initial reaction was like a rush, a thrill, if you will. I gasped. A few weeks later, I was buying a chainsaw at Cableman's Hardware in Michigan City, Indiana, when I got the email saying I was in. This time I played it cool. No gasping. However, I did regard it as a sign that I should buy the more expensive chainsaw. When my wife, Nika, first heard the news that I was to be inducted, she shed some tears. When my daughter Amy found out, she got a little weepy. Now, it would have been nice if my parents were around to witness this. When I was a Boy Scout, I know, hard to believe, my mother, Marjorie Victoria Records, drove me all over Ann Arbor, Michigan, selling Christmas trees door to door to save up enough money to buy my first radio, a 6-transistor made by Channel Master, $36. I have a great memory of being at the dinner table that evening while my father listened to the news of the day on my radio. Finally, I would like to thank those broadcast professionals who deemed me worthy of this great honor. I'd also like to thank everybody who listened to me, everybody who worked with me, and everybody who married me. Thank you.
Don't forget the award.